being a leader is not about how you can take whatever thing it is that you're doing to the finish line. It's how you can empower everybody else to support that cause and get us to the finish line.
Are you experiencing lack of mentorship and might not want to ask because you don't want to look incompetent? Is the thought of being imperfect keeping you from taking action? Welcome to Inspired Action for Imperfect Humans Season 3. Each week, we interview senior leaders to uncover the inner workings of being a strategic leader and how they curate a corporate coaching culture. We debunk some common misconceptions by exploring their failures and successes as imperfect humans. This weekly mentorship will help you with tactics to play the game, navigate the politics, and think strategically. From the heart of Calgary, Canada, here's your host, award-winning coach, Kyle Kalloo.
Oh my goodness, what an intro, eh, Glenn? It gives me goosebumps every time I hear it just about what's out there. So everyone, before we meet Glenn, let me just do a quick little intro. So I'm really excited to have Glenn with us today for a couple of reasons, and we're gonna get into it in a moment here. But just a few things that I think a lot of people may or may not know, because if you're not from that circle in property management, you may not know. But Glenne Manlig is the president of FirstService Residential, Alberta. We're in more than 15 years of property management experience. He's really kind of got under his belt. Glenn oversees the FirstService Alberta team, who delivers service and solutions to more than 300 managed communities in Alberta. And if you want to break that down, that's over about 25,000 homes. That is a lot, Glenn, for you to be able to kind of stay up at night. Maybe, I don't know how you sleep, but we'll get into that. Glenn's a servant leader with the philosophy that his purpose is to serve those he's responsible to or for, whether it's for the homes or professionally, right, as a whole. Glenn also would tell you, for those people may know him, will know that he's more for his people and his teams, right? He works for them, and it's not the other way around, which I love, especially those who follow from a servant leadership perspective. And so I like that mindset, Glenn, when you kind of get into it. And so I'm curious, of all the things you could have done, why this gig? How did that happen?
Yeah, great question, Kyle. And I guess first and foremost, just, appreciate you and having me on your podcast, and certainly excited to be here. It wasn't like I, went to college and said, what's the, undergrad or what's the courses that I need to take to be a property manager.
Right.
I think many of the peers that I have, many of the team members that I have, I think would say the same thing. We've kind of just fallen into this by accident. But in that accident, I kind of look at it as, things happen for a reason.
Okay.
I came from a year where, I needed to find a job, and it was during that time where you still find employment on a newspaper.
Okay. I remember that.
Yeah, it wasn't Googling this or on Indeed or LinkedIn, none of that stuff.
No.
Where you have the opportunities, and there was a position for a resident manager role for a mid-rise building here in Calgary.
Okay.
And it was great on paper. You get to live for free. You get to work from home. At the time, the money was good for a bachelor like myself.
Right.
Right kind of downtown core of Calgary. And it kind of did all of the responsibilities itself kind of fit what I did naturally. Take ownership, be proud of what I do, talk to people, be personal, and serve people. So, I started in this industry by accident as a resident manager for a mid-rise building, and here I am today.
Do they still do that? Because I remember that. I think growing up, a buddy of mine, he was in these apartments, and I think they called them super at the time, and they lived in the building, and so that's where they were. Wasn't that difficult because they knew where you lived, and there's no office hours, is there?
Yeah, no, it was a 365-day job for sure.
Whoa.
It's in the role that I filled, and yes, it still happens today, Kyle. Really in kind of multifamily apartment space,
Okay.
kind of the 30 to 100 unit type, 3 to 5 level building.
Sounds like they made it easier from your day of 300.
Yeah, but they did everything, right? Like you wore multiple hats. You were the maintenance guy. You cleaned a little bit. You collected rent. You showed suites. You were the after hours person. You did all of that stuff. And I think those that really have succeeded and have advanced themselves from kind of that beginning are those that really kind of value the ownership and the rewarding feeling that you know that you're doing something for somebody's most important thing, which was their home.
Their home.
So, a lot of the peers that I have that are, that have kind of advanced and have kind of taken the same journey as I have, I think there is that pride in knowing that what we do, it takes care of people's homes. So
there's like this end game to it, and I think that I appreciate you saying that, Glenn, because I want to talk a little bit about that journey from that into the leaderships as a senior leader you are right now. And I think a lot of times people don't remember that we've started somewhere. Like it's just, you don't just get out of school and boom, you become the president, the CEO, senior executive, right? There's usually this path that kind of happens along the way, and I think that's when we talk about on our podcast of Inspired Action for Imperfect Humans, is that there's none of us that's perfect. There is no perfect line, getting to where we are. And I think that's for our listeners and people who are watching as well, just to understand a little bit about how we got there. So you did this 365 where you had to learn how to multitask, reprioritize, be everything, right? Between the leader to doing it yourself and to this role. Like, what has that journey, would you say, in your leadership has been like for you? If you could kind of summarize that.
Yeah, in the beginning, and I'll even take this a little, a couple of steps back prior to getting into this profession. I played competitive sports. I played competitive basketball.
Yeah.
And,
me too.
not
competitive, just basketball.
No, I'm definitely not competitive anymore.
Okay.
It was many, many years ago.
Okay.
But at the time, it was, leader to me was, you were the best at something. You were the expert at something. You were the one that gave the instructions. And it was a lot about you, my mind. It's a lot about me. It also came from a cultural place and kind of a personal place in terms of how I viewed leadership at the time was, culturally and from the larger family that I have. I'm a sibling, 9 of us, but tenure was always important.
Okay.
Elder is leader.
Yeah. There's a role.
So that hierarchy based on tenure and age was, kind of when I first started my journey, I said, you got to be the best at something. You got to be the expert, and you got to be the oldest. Right? So that was kind of the beginning. Yeah. And as things started to progress and you start to mature and you start to experience, I quickly realized that, from being a leader is not about how you can take whatever thing it is that you're doing to the finish line. It's how you can empower everybody else to support that cause and get us to the finish line. So it became very I to we. And it also became very clear that the wisest and the smartest didn't come from age. It came from experience. And sometimes experiences outweigh the importance of age itself. Yeah. And vice versa. I mean, I think there's always been, again, that, importance around, the older you are, the wiser you are, the leader that you are. Right. And as the journey progressed, it's been about what kind of experiences have you had? How have you learned? How have you helped empowered others? How did you contribute in solving a problem for somebody else? How are you able to serve that person or that thing without you being in the front instead of being from the back?
Right. Glenn, listen, I mean, I know we don't have a lot of time, and I think we said that before, is that the whole concept of leadership is so much, right, that we obviously can't, unpack all of it. You said some other stuff too that I think, North Americans, they may not fully grasp, which is these cultural things, right? Things that I thought was, just our culture, realize it's everyone else's culture outside of North America for whatever reason, right? And so there's some cultural pieces because yes, your background plays a role into it, and so I get what you mean by that, being the first son, being the first grandson. Like there is a hierarchy of all these things that's expected, and I don't know about you, but no one sat me down and said, okay, you got to lead this. This is what it looks like, right? And so you figure it out, and I like how you were able to make that transition between recognizing, it moves from, because there's some few leaders still to this day have the mindset of 1812 that says, I have to be the one to do it. I have to come up with great ideas. I have to be the expert. And that's actually not true. And that's kind of what you said is how do I move a collective group, right, to a certain vision? And so with that, there's got to be some failures along the way. Like if you could highlight, what were some of the failures you could say that you kind of figured out or learned along that journey?
Yeah, I got two very distinct. One is going to go back to kind of my days of playing competitive basketball. I played junior college, I played university, and my mind, I'm going to be a pro player.
Yeah, and I'm thinking point guard. I'm thinking
point guard.
Yeah, I knew you would be. I
played for the University of Manitoba, and I played for SAIT a couple of years.
There you go.
It's knowing that basketball competitiveness journey was more than just the athletics.
Exactly.
Just everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And so failing in, completing my 4-year or my 5-year journey with that time at U of M and SAIT,
mm-hmm.
I think that failure for me allowed me to realize that there was something else out there for me.
Mm.
And at the time, all I knew was basketball. All I envisioned was, this is how I'm going to pay my bills. This is how I'm going to raise my family. And if I hadn't failed, if I hadn't advanced, I wouldn't be in the position that I've been today. I wouldn't have been coming off of that year looking for that job in that newspaper to say, how can I make ends meet now?
Mm-hmm.
How do I do this? Because I'm not playing basketball anymore.
Right.
That journey is kind of has so, I think that failure has taught me that, look, things happen for a reason, and just keep pressing, keep being yourself, and know that there might be a calling out there for you that might not be the original calling that you had aspired to. The second failure I wanted to just kind of mention professionally, and I don't want to come across, overly confident in this.
Right.
I haven't had too many professional mistakes where I've been fired or on a performance plan or any of that kind of stuff. And I think, if anything, like I think about my career, I've advanced quite quickly. While it's been bottoms up, resident manager, property manager, operations manager, et cetera, it's been fairly quickly. But what I've found is by not failing in those instances, I hadn't had that experience of failing. So when I'm failing now, it's like, oh, this sucks. It hurts. And then you're also expected and have this responsibility to lead while trying to learn this new experience. So the failure for me is not failing enough. If that makes any sense.
It does. Yeah, because I was just going to say to you, you got lucked out, because trust me, you need a good 1 or 2 firing to get that under your belt to humble you to then say, you know what? Because there's make no mistake, and I did this in a previous world I was in where, and I'm looking forward because I'm speaking to someone from that same organization that's going to be coming up. And before I left that, I burnt some bridges. I know people tell you don't burn bridges because you never know, which for the most part, yes, is true. So please, those who are listening, I don't condone it. Be strategic about the bridge you burn, right? But I did because I was just so fed up with the crappy leaders I was surrounded with. Because here's the thing, when an employee starts complaining about leadership, they're not going to say, oh, besides Kyle, everyone else is horrible, right? But besides Kyle, they don't say, they just say the leadership here sucks. They blame the company, right? And there's all this other stuff that goes with it. And so there are times where I know I needed to be fired out of this place. Like I know, and besides the package is a lot better when you get fired, right? But there's moments where you just have to, it's a good thing when you get fired from this company because they're doing you a favor. And so to your other point around these things sometimes will happen for a reason, sometimes it will allow you to get into that. However, what I heard from you, Glenn, is that you got an opportunity to learn that in your first failure side, right? As the playing competitive, doing those sports, right? Because there are games you just don't win, right? Mm-hmm. No matter how good you were, no matter how set you guys were, no matter how organized, those things will happen. And I'm noticing a common pattern as I'm talking to a lot of these leaders here is that we seem to get up. People seem to get up and get back in line. It's not about, oh my God, I failed. This is done. I'm done, 6 feet under, let me in. You know what I mean? You actually get up and you go back into it, which is what I can really appreciate. So I would say to you, the silver lining you would say for all these failures would be what? If there was a silver lining.
Yeah, I mean, the silver lining for me is that you have another opportunity.
Awesome.
that the basketball journey didn't work out for me. I have another opportunity to find a different calling. Mm-hmm. While I had left, a very highly respected organization where I've had a mentor that I just very much respected and appreciated, I knew I had an opportunity to advance my career. The silver lining in all of these lessons and these failures is that you have another chance
to do it.
Right? So I think that's a silver lining, Kyle.
Yeah, I really like that because isn't that really the truth? There's I don't know if I read that somewhere. I like to think I made it up myself, but I know I didn't, which is, an opportunity is never lost. It just goes to the next person. Right? And so what may not be your opportunity could have been someone else's, right? Or maybe there's another opportunity for you elsewhere. And it's back to that mindset that we were just kind of alluding to about, we think the plan was supposed to do the following, right? And sometimes we can't even imagine the position we're in because you're like, I didn't even think about that. Like you said earlier, I didn't say I need to go to this leadership thing and I'm going to be property management and resident and be called on 365 days, out of the year. So I like that. So what would you say, Glenn, that if you had to define success, I know there's many people out there probably way smarter than you and I, but if you had to, define success, what would you say that is for those who are merging leaders listening?
You're already bang on. I'm not smart enough to define. It's too complicated. I'll say this, Kyle. In the past, I measured success quantitatively. It's about money. The more money I made, the more successful I was.
Yeah.
And you hear this from a lot of top leaders, top coaches.
Of course, yeah.
The expensive vacations and the nicer clothes, and the nicer cars, and the more direct reports that you have, the bigger the P&L that you manage. All of those things are quantitative. I'm successful because, I can measure it in numbers. I think now I measure success qualitatively. It's the level of engagement, with my customers, my team, more importantly, my home. I've got 3 beautiful daughters and a wife that just is absolutely the rock, and I can be engaged and have a one-on-one conversation where I'm absolutely in the moment. That's success to me.
Oh, and you know what's great about that, Glenn? Sorry to interrupt you on that, but you know what's great about that? Your daughters and your wife, I'm sure, do not know you're the president.
They absolutely don't. And being able to feel the impact that you made by just listening to understand when somebody's going through a really rough time. Having that impact on being able to guide or empower somebody and they've solved the problem or have completed a major project, and then you can just see it in their eyes how proud they are. I think I measure my success and success generally in ways that you can qualitatively know that you've increased engagement, you've earned trust, you've contributed, and you've impacted, somebody's life in a very positive way.
Right.
So I think that's what I would say to that question. Again, not smart enough to actually define it.
Listen, if being smart means you know it all, then I don't want it, right? Because at the end of the day, when I worked at McDonald's, the founder, Ray Kroc, often says, when you're green, you're growing. When you're ripe, you've rotten. And so my main thing is just always about how do I stay green? And that really resonates with me about just being, connected. And it's about engagement. That's really is the legacy, right? Of did I matter to someone's development or, their contribution to the organization, to themselves, right? To their teams and to their colleagues, because that's what I would like to think wherever you go that you could take that with you. Because what you can't take, and I don't know about you, but I've never seen, a U-Haul at the back of a funeral car, a hearse. I've never seen that because you can't take your stuff, right? You just have to take what you're able to do. So what would you say is a challenge right now in your leadership? Like, as you think about, where you're trying to bring the organization, is there a challenge right now for you in leadership?
I mean, look, there's always challenges that come up, whether it's, managing, your customers' expectations or managing, your teams. I think what continues to percolate up is maintaining the consistency of engagement with our team.
Love that.
You started it off at the top. Our industry in property management, it's a tough industry. It's thankless. And our team members that are providing that service, the other side of that is a recipient of taking care of their homes.
Right.
And so when all you hear is complaints, this and that, and all of the good things that get kind of overshadowed, it takes a toll on individuals. So being able to continue to inspire and engage and articulate to the associates of what they do matters so much is so important. So I think that's going to be a never-ending challenge. And, our solution is to continue to be engaged and to continue to get ahead of it. We have a philosophy that bring your whole selves to work, the good, the bad, the indifferent.
Yeah.
And we do that so that when times get tough, you've established a relationship with your peers that you can get through with anybody else.
Yeah. Okay, Glenn, we did a podcast on this. We had to do two segments of it because people were really engaged on that. And my business partner, Christopher, feels very passionate about this said subject. And I'm going to kind of put you on the spot a little bit by asking you your opinion on it. What we often hear from a lot of leaders, and again, I'm going back to sometimes the mindset of 1812, and that seems to be the year I keep going back to tell you how ancient things are. And they say, you know what, you need to check your emotions at the door. When you show up to work, you need to check your emotions at the door. Now, what I heard, and I'm giving you an opportunity to clarify it, what I'm hearing from you is that may not necessarily be check your emotions at the door. It means bring it all in because you are this human, right, that needs to come in. So correct me if I'm wrong. Like, do you want them to check at the door or do you want them to bring it in?
Yeah. When I hear that phrase, I don't take it very literal. It's, in my mind, you're mindful of your emotions. You come in and you know where your mood is.
Right.
If you think of a day where, you've come from a very tough meeting the night before, and if you feel like you've let things down or let people down, you're going to come in the office with, you're frustrated. You're like, oh, I just gave it my all and I blew that, whatever it was, right? So I don't take it so literal, but I ask that associate to say, check your mood in that, where are you? And bring your whole self and say, this is where I'm at, Glenn. I'm impatient. I'm frustrated. Why are you frustrated? Let's talk about it. And through that conversation, hopefully we can navigate your thought process in a little bit more of a productive state, where then your behavior changes, your mood changes.
Of course.
As a result, then results change.
Yeah.
So I don't take it literally, that phrase. And to clarify, I absolutely promote, encourage that everybody comes in here. And it starts definitely at the leaders. Like, our leaders have to cast that shadow and show that vulnerability. That you come in and I'm super happy. and here are the reasons why I am.
Yeah.
And today I'm upset. I'm disappointed because of this is what's happened. Let's work through it. But again, the intent of that is when the really tough situations occur,
Right.
you got to ballot it out with the guy next to you. You want to do it with the guy that you know, that you've trusted and you've shared some vulnerabilities. And, you know, I can go to battle with all my family members because we've gone through hell and back.
Gone through. Yeah.
You know,
I mean,
so
and you're using an interesting word, and I don't see it a lot in leaders, is vulnerability. You know what I mean? And, you know, because I think some people sometimes feel they cannot be vulnerable to their team, right? And I'm going to ask you a question about, you know, creating a corporate coaching culture in a second. And for those who are listening, I'll do a quick definition of that in a second. But I think what's happening is that, you know, we are humans. We're going to make mistakes. Like you heard already today, right? Like you've said, is about, you know, I had failures. I've learned from some of those things, and, you know, I'm able to still take action, which is going to that next level of what that looks like. And sometimes people need to know from an engagement perspective that you're human, right? There was a survey that came out where people, and it's came up a lot with the pandemic, where people were saying, I don't know, putting these jobs back out and no people that we call to offer the job. I have a couple of clients who are like, we're calling them and they're not coming back. And here's what I've noticed. When we go through a pandemic or, you know, something like that, you know, even a death in a family, we tend to start looking back and saying, reevaluating our own life. And some people are saying, why am I going back to that deadbeat job? Why am I going back to that culture? Why am I going? And that's really what it is. And it's always about the engagement. You know, we blame money sometimes by saying, well, they weren't even paying me good anyway, right? Mm-hmm. But it's really about, I didn't feel engaged. My leader didn't respect me. You know, he's up here, I'm down here, right? There's always this thing that kind of goes back. And so I've said to these new clients or even prospects, I said, I would say, check your culture. Like, what are you doing? You know, and so what I mean by that, for those who are listening, and I'm curious of your input on it as well, is, you know, more and more organizations have recognized the value of building a corporate culture of coaching that offers employees at all levels, right? And that's kind of what you mentioned already, Glenn, right? And it's not just for the executives or the managers, it's the opportunity for everyone in the organization to grow their skills, enhance their value, and reach their professional goals. Because back in 1812, we only spent money on leaders. We only taught leaders. We only mention all these other things, right? And I know you'd be surprised to hear this, Glenn. A lot of the leaders I'm talking to, usually they're telling me that the issue is with their team, not them. Right? The team is the issue. And it's interesting when I go and I do a facilitation with the team, they realize, like, maybe I need to talk to you. I'm like, interesting, right? So because they can only do what, like you said, it has to start at that level. If the leaders are not doing it, then what does that look like? So I'm actually curious, you know, from your perspective, what is it that you guys are doing in your organization that will help curate that corporate coaching culture? Is there something that you guys do?
Yeah, you know, I think our core values, and similarly to all of our, you know, competitors in other industries, you know, they're there to be able to guide us in the way that we interact, we provide service, and coach, and we teach, and all these things. What I really appreciate about FirstService Residential is that our core values are very human core values. Like right there in the back, our values.
Yes.
That screen. Yes. There's 6 of them.
I like that you have it up. Because usually people have to look for it.
No, it's right there. I'll name a few. It's improve it. Yeah. It's aim high. It's build great relationships. It's own it. You know, you think about those things, and I think about those things, and I'm like, that's how I want my kids to be raised.
Absolutely.
I want my kids to own it, be accountable. You make a mistake, own up to it and fix it and solve the problem. You know, I want them to continuously improve their experience, life, whatever it is. You know, I want them to aim high. I want them to shoot for the stars, right? So all of these things are very human and very personal.
Yes. Yeah.
Take that into the corporate world, and you have a mindset of bring everything, bring your whole self. That's a recipe for engagement, because folks are going to believe that this is the stuff that I do at home, and our corporation, our company gives us permission to bring our whole selves.
Yes.
But a leader that is vulnerable, that can say, hey, look at that leader. That leader doesn't have to be the smartest. He's
Exactly.
finding people that are smarter than him
Yeah.
intentionally.
Yeah. Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is strategy. This is ludicrous. He's crazy,
Yeah.
but it gives our associates that permission to say, this is genuine. This is real. This is authentic. And when times get tough, I'm going to look back at this experience and say, it's worth it for me to continue to stay here, although the industry is tough. So, I would say our core values are very personal. They're very human.
Mm-hmm.
And you mix that with the mindset of you can bring your whole self. And that's top, down, left, right.
Right. No matter.
Everybody's expected to do it. It's not
Yeah.
it's not just nice fancy words on the wall.
Which, hey, a lot of people have. A lot of people have. And like I said, the work we do is when I say, tell me your vision, if I ask everyone in the organization the number one priority, would they know? And the moment they pause, that's the problem. Because if someone has to fish it out, then that's going to be a thing.
And can I just, it's interesting because when I first started FirstService 4 years ago, I saw that. I had, I was a bit skeptical. I'm like, oh yeah, it's great. Sounds good. And then, as months went on, very quickly, I'm like, some of these individuals really live these values because that's who they are as a person. And so then there was a population where you need to just allow them to realize that this is you. You just gotta get it out. You gotta help them cultivate that this is who you are. You just need to be able to get that permission to be genuine, and that you have the value of improving it. You can aim high. But it's astonishing to me because you're absolutely right. There's instances where there's pretty words and, great marketing behind core values. And then there's that and people that actually live it because that's who they are as a person. And it's just a matter of leadership to try to cultivate it from the rest of the folks.
Yeah, because then it comes back to that whole self that you were talking about, right? Is if it's not about self, it's not a part of you, and it's not real enough for you, then how can I bring it? You know what I mean? And so that's why I really like that piece around the whole self. Now, some leaders that are listening, and just as a final question for you today, Glenn, we talk about the emerging senior leaders. These are leaders who want to bring their game to the next level, or maybe people who never thought of leadership and may think, because there's some scary ones out there, right? And I know you'd be surprised to hear about this, but maybe once upon a time in my life, earlier in my career, I might have been a shitty leader. I'm just going to put it out there. I might have been. I know you're surprised. But that might have happened. And I think sometimes that's what people are exposed to. In my opinion, at least the ones I've been exposed to is there's a lot of shitty leaders out there. And so for those who are emerging leaders who want to get to your level, right, want to start aspiring and plan out them for themselves, is there one thing that you can say, I would do this, right? Be mindful of this. This is what you should do day in, day out. What advice would you give that leader? And the head fake is, this is the advice you would give your younger self.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. If I was to say just one piece of advice, I say this to my team, relentlessly, is you establish a goal, have a target. That's important. You want to know where you're going. As soon as you establish that target, put all of your focus and be obsessed with the process. You know that every day there's going to be mundane stuff. There's going to be boring things that you have to do to get to that goal, but do it with intent. Embrace that. Love the boring stuff. Be patient. You know that it's going to suck, but it's part of it. But if you have that mentality of just being obsessed with the process, the result is going to come.
Yeah. How can it not?
How can it not, right? And sometimes the result is not the initial result that you wanted, but it might lead you to something else.
Yeah.
And again, it's back to trust the process. Set a goal, set the target. As soon as you do it, leave it alone and just be relentless on the process.
But I think sometimes, and that's great, and it's not a but, and I think the situation sometimes with that is that sometimes we get knocked off, or what I say, distracted, and then we no longer trust the process. We no longer aspire to that, right? Do you find that sometimes it's like something happens, you're like, oh, I'm done, I'm out. Like we give up so easily.
And you're absolutely right. And I think, part of that process, because, there might be, the first series of things that need to happen, but you have to have a contingency plan. You have to have a plan B. Sometimes you can't write out those contingency plans and plan B until that situation actually occurs. You have to kind of navigate in different ways. I would say that part of the process is being disciplined. It's hard. It really is difficult, right? It's knowing that this happened for a reason. Let's look into it. Let's understand that, hey, we got to adjust here. We got to make, a different move here, but continue to move forward. You might sometimes move sideways, of course, which is okay, but just don't move backwards.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's the piece where then you start to say, well, screw the process. Process is working, but know that going sideways is better than, taking that step backwards.
Yeah, I really love that. My mom used to say to me, and I quote my mom a lot only because, she thought I wasn't listening, right? You know how that goes, right? Because if you don't do what she says, you're not listening. When I'm like, I heard you. Doesn't mean I agree, but I heard you. And one of the things she would sometimes often say is, sometimes you make the right decision. Sometimes you have to make the decision right. You know what I mean? And it's that's of what you just mentioned about the sideways. There's times where you're like, okay, I really thought this is, but I'm still going to decide. I'm still going to keep moving, right? I'm still going to just, keep that going. So thank you so much for that, Glenn. In summary, when I think about what we were talking about today is, at the end of the day, you may be put into a situation, and what do you do with that situation? How do you make the best out of that situation? Because if you're not mindful of your whole self and how you bring it into play and how do you engage with other people, then that could be your demise, right? And so the fact that you need to be able to show some vulnerability in your leadership, to know that success is just around the corner, success is learning from all of those little life lessons, is really going to help someone be more strategic in their leadership and getting them to where they need to be. So Glenn, hopefully I summarized that okay. But thank you so much for being here. And folks who are listening, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe or download, our podcast. Share this with, a friend, especially when we're thinking about your own leadership and mentoring. Because I know for some leaders out there, you may not have the type of mentoring you wish you could have. But if you want, you heard from Glenn, he's all about bringing your whole self to it, which that makes sense. And there's nothing wrong with you going back to your leader and let him know that he needs to step that up. He or she needs to step up that game, because I think Glenn and I are going to change how leadership lead in this world, not even country, in this world. Thank you so much. See you guys next week.
There you have it. Thank you for listening. It's our goal to build a global community of inspired action takers, and we can only do that with your help. So, if you love Inspired Action for Imperfect Humans podcast, please leave us a review on your favorite podcasting app. Provide a rating, download, subscribe, and share us on your socials. New episodes every Tuesday. You've heard from us. Now, we want to hear from you. Keep the conversation going by joining our private Facebook group, Inspired Action for Imperfect Humans, or go to inspiredactionpodcast.ca. and tell us, what is the inspired action you took this week? Next week on Inspired Action for Imperfect Humans.
You'll have to make some changes to that team. And to me, that's what leadership really is making those hard decisions and having a vision that people really want to follow.